White passenger demands black twins move to back. The girls started crying, but a few minutes later, the flight captain came out and made a statement that shocked everyone in the cabin. These girls need to move to the back where they belong. The woman's voice sliced through the first-class cabin like a blade, sharp and entitled and dripping with disgust. Helen Chamberlain stood in the aisle of Flight 1847 from Atlanta to Los Angeles, her designer purse clutched to her chest like a shield, her pale face twisted into an expression of pure indignation. She was pointing at seats 2A and 2B, where 12-year-old twins Amara and Zuri sat frozen, their matching purple backpacks still clutched in their laps, their eyes going wide with confusion and fear. "Excuse me?" The flight attendant, a young woman named Kelly with tired eyes, stepped closer. "Madam, is there a problem?" "Yes, there's a problem." Helen's voice rose higher, carrying to every corner of first class, making heads turn, making conversations stop mid-sentence. "I paid $3,000 for this ticket, and I am not sitting next to them. They're obviously in the wrong section. Someone made a mistake. They need to move to economy where they belong." The way she said "them" made it clear she wasn't talking about children. She was talking about black children. The distinction hung in the recycled cabin air like smoke. Amara felt her twin sister's hand find hers under the armrest, felt Zuri's fingers trembling. They'd been so excited this morning, getting up early at their grandmother's house in Atlanta, putting on their matching sundresses that their mom had sent them, the yellow ones with the white flowers. Their hair was done in neat cornrow braids with beads at the ends that clicked softly when they moved. They'd practiced being mature, being responsible, proving they were old enough to fly alone to visit their mother in California for spring break. Their first time in first class. Their first time flying without an adult sitting right next to them. Their father had wanted them comfortable, had used his miles to upgrade them, had kissed them both at security and reminded them to be brave, to be kind, to remember who they were. But right now, with this white woman standing over them like they were criminals who'd snuck into somewhere they didn't belong, Amara didn't feel brave. She felt small. She felt wrong. She felt like maybe they had made a mistake, even though she absolutely knew, their boarding passes said 2A and 2B, first class, printed clear as day. "Let me check their tickets," Kelly said, her voice professional but strained. She looked at the twins with something that might have been sympathy or might have been suspicion. It was hard to tell. "Girls, can I see your boarding passes?" Zuri's hand shook as she pulled the paper from her backpack. Amara did the same, both of them holding out the documents like they were proving their right to exist. Kelly examined them carefully, too carefully, like she was looking for evidence of fraud. "These are valid first-class tickets," Kelly said slowly, looking up at Helen. "Seats 2A and 2B. The girls are in the correct seats, madam." "That's impossible," Helen snapped. "Look at them. They're children. Nobody puts unaccompanied children in first class. Check again. There must be an error in the system. Check again." Like the first check wasn't enough. Like these two well-dressed 12-year-olds with their proper tickets and their unaccompanied minor badges hanging around their necks must be lying somehow, must be scamming the system, must be anything except exactly what they were, passengers in their assigned seats. Other first-class passengers were watching now. A businessman in 3C peered over his newspaper. A woman across the aisle clutched her champagne glass tighter. A couple near the front whispered to each other, their eyes darting between Helen and the twins and back again. But nobody said anything. Nobody stood up. Nobody told Helen she was wrong, that she was being cruel, that 12-year-old girls shouldn't have to defend their right to sit in seats their father bought for them. The silence was almost worse than Helen's words. Have you ever watched someone be treated like they don't belong somewhere, just because of how they look? Have you ever been that person, feeling everyone's eyes on you, feeling the weight of assumptions and prejudice pressing down until you can't breathe? Drop your story in the comments. Tell us where it happened, when someone decided you didn't deserve to take up space. And if you think this is just about airline seats, if you think racism is just a word people throw around when they don't get their way, then maybe you should stop watching now. But if you believe that children, any children, deserve to be treated with dignity, deserve to sit in seats their family paid for without being humiliated, then you need to stay right here. Hit that subscribe button for Hyper Racism channel, Smash that like button, because what happens next on this flight will show you exactly what happens when prejudice meets consequences, when assumptions collide with truth. Share this with someone who's ever felt like they didn't belong. Share it with someone who needs to understand that silence in the face of discrimination makes you part of the problem. Because Helen Chamberlain had no idea that her entitled rage was about to backfire in the most spectacular way possible. She had no idea who those girls were. She had no idea who was sitting in the cockpit of that plane, listening to every word through the intercom system. And in about 60 seconds, everyone on Flight 1847 was about to find out. Kelly, the flight attendant, stood in the aisle, her tablet clutched in both hands, looking between Helen Chamberlain and the two girls like she was trying to solve an equation that didn't add up. The first-class cabin of the Boeing 777 was all cream leather and polished wood accents, soft lighting designed to make wealthy passengers feel pampered, insulated from the chaos of economy. But right now, that luxury setting felt more like a stage, with every seat occupied by an audience watching a drama none of them had paid to see. "Ma'am, I've confirmed their tickets multiple times," Kelly said, her voice tight with the strain of staying professional. "These girls have every right to be in these seats." Helen's face flushed a deeper shade of red. She was in her late 50s, her blonde hair cut in that expensive style that required weekly salon visits, her cream-colored pantsuit probably worth more than most people's monthly rent. Diamond earrings caught the cabin light. A Hermes scarf draped artfully around her neck. She looked like money, old money, the kind that came with assumptions about who belonged where. "Then I want to be moved," Helen declared, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone who'd spent a lifetime getting exactly what she wanted by demanding it loudly enough. "I refuse to sit next to them. I paid for a premium experience, not this." She gestured at Amara and Zuri like they were objects, inconveniences, problems to be solved rather than human beings. Amara felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. She was the older twin by 7 minutes, and those 7 minutes had always felt like a responsibility. She had to be strong for Zuri, had to show her sister how to handle moments like this, even though she had no idea how to handle this herself. The twins had been raised by their father and grandmother in Atlanta after their mother, Sierra, moved to Los Angeles for a job opportunity 3 years ago. The divorce had been amicable, or as amicable as divorces could be. Their parents still loved each other in that complicated way adults do, but sometimes love wasn't enough when careers pulled people in different directions, when dreams didn't align the way they used to. Captain James Mitchell flew for Delta Airlines, had been flying for 20 years, and had worked his way up from regional carriers to international routes through sheer determination and excellence. He'd grown up in Birmingham, Alabama, the son of a postal worker and a nurse, and he'd fallen in love with airplanes watching them take off from the Birmingham Shuttlesworth International Airport as a kid. His parents had scraped together money for flight lessons when he was 16, believing in his dream even when guidance counselors suggested more realistic career paths for a black kid from their neighborhood. He'd proven them all wrong. Had become one of the youngest black captains at a major airline. Had flown routes all over the world. Had raised 2 daughters to be confident, intelligent, and proud of who they were. Those daughters sat in seats 2A and 2B now, trying to be brave while a woman who'd never met them decided they weren't good enough to breathe the same first-class air. "I need to speak to a supervisor," Helen demanded, her voice rising another notch. "This is unacceptable. I want these girls moved, or I want compensation, or I want off this plane. Do you understand me?" Kelly looked exhausted, defeated by a problem she couldn't solve because solving it would require either violating policy or telling a paying customer no in a way that might cost her job. "Ma'am, I don't have the authority to." "Then get someone who does." Helen's purse hit the armrest with a thump. "I'm not sitting here. I'm not flying with them next to me. Either you fix this, or I'm calling my lawyer and corporate headquarters and making sure everyone knows how your airline treats first-class passengers." Other passengers shifted uncomfortably. The businessman folded his newspaper, pretending sudden fascination with the safety card. The woman with the champagne finished it in one long swallow. A teenage boy in 4A had his phone out, recording, but he was holding it low like he wasn't sure if he should be documenting this or staying out of it. Zuri's tears had started falling now, silent tracks down her cheeks that she tried to wipe away quickly, ashamed of crying, ashamed of being the cause of this scene even though she'd done nothing wrong except exist in a seat she had every right to occupy. "It's okay," Amara whispered to her sister, though her own voice was shaking. "We didn't do anything wrong." But that's the thing about discrimination. You don't have to do anything wrong. You just have to be born looking a certain way, and suddenly, people who don't know your name, your story, your dreams, your worth, decide you don't belong in spaces they've claimed as their own. Helen was still ranting, her voice getting louder, more insistent, demanding action, demanding satisfaction, demanding that these children be removed from her sight. And Kelly was on her radio now, calling for backup, calling for a supervisor, calling for someone with enough authority to handle a situation that should never have been a situation in the first place. What none of them knew, what Helen Chamberlain especially didn't know, was that in the cockpit just 40 feet away, Captain James Mitchell had finished his pre-flight checks. Had heard the commotion through the intercom system that connected the cockpit to the cabin. Had heard a woman demanding that his daughters be moved to the back of the plane. And he was about to make a decision that would change everything. His co-pilot, Sarachan, glanced at him with concern. "Captain, did you hear?" "I heard." James's voice was calm, but his hands had stopped moving over the controls. His jaw was tight. "Those are my daughters." Sarah's eyes went wide. "Oh my God. What are you going to do?" James unbuckled his harness, stood up, his 6'2" frame filling the small cockpit space. His uniform was crisp, his captain's stripes visible on his shoulders, his face set in an expression that was professionally neutral, but his eyes were burning. "I'm going to handle this." He opened the cockpit door and stepped into the cabin. The cockpit door opened with a soft click that somehow carried through the entire first-class cabin. Conversations that had started up again went silent. Helen Chamberlain was mid-sentence, telling Kelly for the third time that she demanded to speak to someone in charge, when she noticed everyone's attention had shifted. A black man in a captain's uniform stepped into the cabin. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who commanded 185 tons of aircraft and hundreds of lives without breaking a sweat. The 4 stripes on his shoulders caught the light, marking him unmistakably as the pilot in command. Captain James Mitchell's eyes swept the cabin, taking in the scene with the trained assessment of someone who'd spent 20 years making split-second decisions. He saw Kelly standing in the aisle, looking relieved and terrified at once. He saw Helen Chamberlain with her flushed face and her designer clothes, and her entitled posture. He saw passengers pretending not to watch while watching everything. And then he saw his daughters, Amara and Zuri, sitting rigid in their seats, Zuri's face wet with tears, Amara trying so hard to be brave, both of them looking smaller than they had this morning when he'd hugged them goodbye at security. His heart, which had been beating fast with anger, now felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. He walked straight to them, his expression softening in a way only his daughters ever saw. He knelt in the aisle beside their seats, eye level with them, his voice gentle. "Amara, you okay?" Zuri's face crumpled completely. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice breaking. "She said we don't belong here." The cabin went absolutely still. You could have heard a pin drop in economy. Everyone was processing the same revelation at once. The captain. The pilot flying this plane. That was their father. Helen's face was drained of color. James reached out and wiped the tears from Zuri's cheeks with his thumb, the way he'd done since she was a baby. "I know, baby girl. I heard." He looked at Amara, saw her fighting to hold it together. "You did nothing wrong. Either of you. You understand me?" "Yes, sir," Amara whispered, though her voice shook. James stood slowly, his 6'2" frame unfolding, and turned to face Helen Chamberlain. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. His voice when he spoke was calm, professional, the voice passengers trusted to keep them safe. But underneath that calm was something else, something that made grown men nervous. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Mitchell. I believe there's been some confusion." Helen's mouth opened and closed. Her face had gone from red to white to a splotchy combination of both. "I didn't realize I was just saying that." You were saying my daughters don't belong in first class. James's tone didn't rise, didn't change inflection. That somehow made it more devastating. You demanded they be moved to the back, where they belong. Is that correct? I didn't know they were your, Helen started. You didn't need to know who their father was, James interrupted quietly. You needed to treat two 12-year-old children with basic human decency. That shouldn't require knowing their family connections or their last name, or who can advocate for them. That should be automatic. The businessman in 3C shifted uncomfortably. The woman across the aisle set down her champagne glass with a clink that sounded too loud. The teenage boy with the phone was definitely recording now, no longer trying to hide it. Helen straightened her shoulders, tried to recover some of her earlier indignation. I have a right to be comfortable on a flight I paid good money for. I was simply asking. You were demanding that children be removed from seats they have tickets for because you don't think they look like they belong in first class. James's voice was still calm, still professional. Let's be clear about what actually happened here. You saw two black girls and decided they must be in the wrong seats. Not because they were being disruptive. Not because there was actually a problem. But because your assumptions about who belongs were based on skin color. That's not, I never said anything about, Helen sputtered. You didn't have to say it, James replied. You said them. You said, where they belong. You said they needed to move to the back. Everyone in this cabin heard you. Several people are recording you. So let's not pretend this was about anything other than what it was. Have you ever watched someone's prejudice get called out in real time? Ever seen someone try to backpedal when they realize they've said the quiet part loud? That's what was happening in seat 1C, and the whole cabin was witnessing it. Helen's hands were shaking now, clutching her purse tighter. I want to speak to your supervisor. This is inappropriate. You're being unprofessional. What's unprofessional, James said, his voice dropping even lower, is demanding that passengers be removed because of your personal biases. What's inappropriate is making two children cry because you've decided they're not good enough to sit near you. Kelly, the flight attendant, stood frozen, her tablet forgotten, watching her captain handle a situation she'd been completely unprepared for. Other crew members had appeared now, the lead flight attendant Maria stepping forward, but James held up one hand, stopping her. Ma'am, he addressed Helen again, you have two choices. You can sit in your assigned seat and treat everyone on this aircraft with respect. Or you can exit this plane right now and find alternative transportation to Los Angeles. But what you will not do is bully children under my command. What you will not do is create a hostile environment on my aircraft. Choose. The word hung in the air like a gavel coming down. Helen looked around the cabin desperately, searching for allies, for support, for someone who would validate her position. But every face that met hers looked away. Some in shame. Some in satisfaction. Some were just relieved they weren't the ones being called out. Helen's voice had lost all its earlier volume. I'll sit. And you'll behave respectfully? James pressed. Yes, she whispered. James held her gaze for one more long moment, making sure she understood that this wasn't over, that her choice today would have consequences beyond this flight. Then he turned back to his daughters. He knelt again, took both their hands. I need to go fly this plane now. But I want you to remember something. You belong everywhere you choose to be. Everywhere. Don't let anyone, ever, make you feel otherwise. You hear me? Yes, Daddy, they said in unison, their voices stronger now. He kissed both their foreheads, whispered something only they could hear, then stood and walked back toward the cockpit. But before he disappeared behind that door, he turned one more time, his eyes sweeping the cabin, settling on each passenger who'd sat silent while his daughters were humiliated. And to everyone else, he said, his voice carrying clearly, the next time you see someone being treated unfairly, the next time you witness discrimination happening right in front of you, remember this moment. Remember that your silence makes you complicit. Speak up. Always. The cockpit door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like punctuation. The cabin remained frozen in that moment after Captain Mitchell disappeared behind the cockpit door. Helen Chamberlain sat in her seat like a statue, her face still, that mottled red and white, her hands gripping the armrests so tight her knuckles had gone pale. The silence was profound, heavy, the kind that makes you aware of your own breathing. Then, slowly, movement returned to the cabin like blood flowing back into a numb limb. An older black woman sitting across the aisle in seat 2D unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned toward Amara and Zuri. Her eyes were wet with tears, but she was smiling, the kind of smile that held generations of understanding. "Your daddy's right, babies," she said softly, reaching across to squeeze Amara's hand. "You belong. Don't you ever forget that." "Thank you," Amara whispered, squeezing back. A white man in his 30s, sitting in 3D, cleared his throat. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice carrying despite being quiet. "I should have said something earlier." "I'm sorry I didn't." Others nodded, murmured agreement. The shame was palpable now, people recognizing their own complicity in their silence, their own comfort prioritized over two children's dignity. But not everyone was experiencing shame. Helen turned in her seat, her earlier fear morphing back into indignation as she processed what had just happened. "This is absurd," she hissed to the businessman in 3C, loud enough for others to hear. "He can't talk to passengers like that. I'm going to report him." He was completely out of line, making this about race when I simply wanted. "Stop talking." The businessman's voice was flat, cold. "Just stop. You humiliated children and got called out for it. Take the loss and sit there quietly." Helen's mouth snapped shut, her face flushing darker. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, started typing furiously. Probably emailing corporate, probably crafting her version of events where she was the victim, where the captain was unprofessional, where her discrimination became a reasonable complaint. Maria, the lead flight attendant, approached Helen with a clipboard and a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ma'am, I need to document this incident for our records. Can you confirm that Captain Mitchell offered you the opportunity to deplane before takeoff?" "He threatened me," Helen snapped. "He was hostile and aggressive." "He gave you a choice," Maria corrected, her pen poised over the form. "Sit respectfully or exit the aircraft. You chose to stay. I need you to confirm that for the record." Helen's jaw worked. She could see where this was going, could see the documentation building a case against her rather than the captain. I chose to stay." "And you agree to treat all passengers with respect for the duration of this flight?" "Yes," Helen ground out. Maria made notes, then added, "I should inform you that this incident will be reported to corporate headquarters, and you may be contacted by customer relations regarding your conduct." "My conduct?" Helen's voice rose again. "What about his? What about the way he spoke to a paying customer?" Captain Mitchell defended his minor children from discriminatory harassment, Maria said calmly. "Company policy fully supports his actions. Yours, however, violated our passenger code of conduct, specifically the clause prohibiting discriminatory behavior toward other passengers." The power dynamic had completely inverted. Helen had boarded this plane as a wealthy first-class passenger, used to deference and accommodation, used to having her demands met. Now she was the one being documented, warned, and facing consequences. Amara and Zuri watched this unfold, still holding hands, still processing everything. Their father had stood up for them, had used his authority, his position, his voice to make it clear they mattered. But more than that, he'd done it publicly, had refused to let this moment pass quietly, had insisted that everyone witnessing this understand what had really happened. The older woman across the aisle pulled out a pack of tissues, handed them to Zuri. "Your daddy is something special," she said. "Not every man would stand up like that. Not every father would risk his job to defend his children so publicly." "He said we belong everywhere," Zuri whispered, wiping her eyes. "And he's right. You do. First class, economy, anywhere you want to be. That woman..." The older woman gestured subtly toward Helen. "She's going to learn a hard lesson about treating people right." The engines started their warm-up sequence, the familiar sound that meant departure was approaching. Captain Mitchell's voice came over the speakers, professional and calm as if the last 10 minutes hadn't happened. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Mitchell speaking. We've been cleared for pushback and should be wheels up in about 15 minutes. Flight time to Los Angeles will be approximately 4 hours and 30 minutes. We're expecting smooth air for most of the journey. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for departure. His voice was steady, authoritative, the voice of someone completely in control. Nobody listening would know that minutes ago he'd been kneeling in the aisle, comforting his crying daughters, confronting a passenger who tried to humiliate them. But everyone in first class knew. Everyone in that cabin had just witnessed power being used not to oppress, but to protect. Authority being wielded not for ego, but for justice. Helen sat rigid in her seat as the plane pushed back from the gate, her phone still clutched in her hand, her face still flushed with humiliation and anger. She'd wanted those girls moved. She'd wanted them gone. She'd wanted to assert her perceived superiority. Instead, she'd revealed her own ugliness to a cabin full of witnesses. And now she was trapped on a 5-hour flight sitting 3 feet away from the children she'd tried to demean, with their father literally in control of the aircraft. The question was, what would happen when they landed? The flight leveled off at cruising altitude about 40 minutes into the journey. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began moving around the cabin, stretching, heading to the restrooms, and requesting drinks from the flight attendants. But the tension in first class hadn't dissipated. If anything, it had thickened, becoming more uncomfortable with every passing minute. Helen Chamberlain had been on her phone almost continuously since takeoff, typing furiously, making calls when they reached altitude and the Wi-Fi kicked in. Her voice carried across the cabin even though she was clearly trying to keep it low. Yes, I want to file a formal complaint. No, I'm still on the flight. The captain was completely inappropriate, hostile even. His daughters? They were seated next to me, and when I raised concerns about, no, I'm not being discriminatory, I simply felt, hello. She'd been disconnected. Or more likely, the person on the other end had hung up once they understood what she was actually complaining about. Amara and Zuri had been quiet, reading books their grandmother had packed, trying to pretend they weren't aware of Helen's barely concealed fury radiating from 3 feet away. But every time Helen shifted in her seat with an aggressive huff, every time she muttered something under her breath, they tensed. Kelly came by with the beverage cart, her smile warmer than it had been during boarding. What can I get you girls? We have juice, soda, and water. Apple juice, please, Zuri said softly. Same, Amara added. Coming right up. Kelly poured their drinks with extra care, added cookies without being asked. You two doing okay? Yes, ma'am, Amara replied, because their grandmother had raised them to be polite even when the world wasn't polite back. Kelly moved to Helen. Ma'am, can I get you anything? I want to speak to the head flight attendant, Helen said coldly, not looking up from her phone. That's me. I'm Maria Torres, lead flight attendant. Maria had appeared silently, standing in the aisle with her hands folded professionally, her expression neutral. How can I help you? Helen finally looked up, her eyes hard. I want to be moved to a different seat. Away from them. She didn't even try to be subtle anymore, jerking her head toward the twins. I'm sorry, ma'am, but first class is full. There are no other available seats. Then upgrade someone from economy. Offer them my seat. I don't care. I refuse to sit here for another 3 hours. Maria's expression didn't change. Ma'am, you were given the option to deplane before takeoff. You chose to remain on the aircraft. I can't accommodate a seat change based on personal preferences regarding your fellow passengers. The way she said, personal preferences, made it clear she knew exactly what Helen meant, and she wasn't going to legitimize it by pretending otherwise. Helen's voice rose, losing the veneer of civility she'd been trying to maintain. This is unacceptable. I am a Platinum Elite member. I fly 200,000 miles a year with this airline. I deserve better treatment than this. Ma'am, I need you to lower your voice, Maria said calmly. I will not lower my voice. This is discrimination. You're all treating me like a criminal because I dared to complain about. She caught herself, seemed to realize how her words were sounding. The businessman in 3C stood up, his patience clearly exhausted. Lady, you humiliated 2 kids for no reason except your own bigotry. Nobody here feels sorry for you. Sit down and shut up, or ask them to land this plane so you can get off. How dare you speak to me that way? Helen shot back. How dare you speak to children the way you did? The older black woman across from the twins was standing now, too. You told babies they belong in the back of the plane. The back? Like we're still in the 1950s. Like Rosa Parks died for nothing. You should be ashamed of yourself. Other passengers were murmuring agreement now, some nodding, some pulling out phones to record in case Helen escalated further. The cabin was dividing, sides being taken, the private humiliation becoming increasingly public. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to decide whether to speak up or stay silent? Where you watched injustice unfold and had to choose whether your comfort was worth more than someone else's dignity? That's the choice every passenger in that cabin had faced, and now they were choosing differently, speaking up after staying silent, trying to make up for their earlier complicity. Helen looked around wildly, seeing no allies, only judgment. Her face was bright red now, her breathing fast and shallow. You're all ganging up on me. This is a setup. Those girls probably planned this whole thing, sitting in first class to cause a scene. They're 12 years old, someone shouted from 4B. They were sitting quietly reading, another voice added. You're the only one causing a scene, the businessman in 3C called out. Maria raised her hand, trying to restore order. Everyone please, I need you all to remain calm and return to your seats. But Helen was spiraling now, her carefully constructed justifications crumbling under the weight of collective disapproval. I want to speak to the captain. I want him to explain why he's allowing his crew to harass passengers. You want to speak to me? Everyone turned. Captain Mitchell had emerged from the cockpit again, standing in the entrance to first class, his arms crossed, his expression absolutely unreadable. The cabin went silent instantly. Ma'am, I've been monitoring the situation, he said, his voice carrying that same dangerous calm. You were asked to remain quiet and respectful. You agreed. Instead, you've spent the last hour making phone calls, complaining about my daughters, demanding they be moved, and now accusing them of setting you up. Is that correct? Helen's mouth opened, but for the first time, no words came out. James took a step closer. I'm going to give you one more choice, Miss Chamberlain. One more opportunity to sit quietly for the remainder of this flight. If you can't do that, if you continue to create a disturbance, I will divert this aircraft to the nearest suitable airport and have you removed. Do you understand? You can't do that. Helen found her voice, shrill and panicked. You can't threaten a passenger for... I'm not threatening, James interrupted. I'm informing you of the consequences of your continued behavior. Federal aviation regulations give me complete authority over this aircraft. If I determine a passenger is a disturbance, I can and will remove them. Your platinum status means nothing at 35,000 feet. Helen stood up abruptly, her purse falling to the floor. This is insane. You're all insane. I'm going to sue. I'm going to... And that's when she made her biggest mistake. She reached toward Amara's seat, her hand moving like she was going to grab the girl's arm, like she was going to physically. Do not touch my daughter. James's voice cut through the cabin like thunder. Helen's hand froze in midair, inches from Amara's shoulder. Every eye in first class was locked on that suspended moment, on the woman standing in the aisle with her arm extended and the captain blocking her path like an immovable wall. Step back, James said, his voice low and absolutely final. Now. Helen jerked her hand back like she'd been burned, stumbling slightly as she retreated. I wasn't going to, I was just... You were just attempting to put your hands on a minor without consent. James's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath that made grown men nervous. That's assault. In addition to the discriminatory harassment you've already engaged in, you've now escalated to physical intimidation of a child. I barely touched. You didn't touch her because I stopped you. James pulled his radio from his belt. Sarah, this is Captain Mitchell. Contact Denver ATC. We're diverting. I need ground security standing by upon arrival. The cabin erupted in gasps and whispers. Diverting. He was actually diverting the plane. Helen's face went from red to white in an instant. No. You can't. I have a meeting in L.A. I have. You should have thought about that before you harassed my daughters and attempted to physically intimidate them. James spoke into the radio again, his voice crisp and professional. Passengers, this is Captain Mitchell. Due to a disturbance in the cabin, we'll be making an unscheduled landing in Denver. I apologize for the inconvenience to your travel plans, but passenger safety is always our primary concern. Flight attendants, please prepare for early descent. The plane banked slightly, the change in direction subtle but definite. They were really doing this. A commercial flight with nearly 300 passengers diverting because one woman couldn't control her prejudice. No, no, no. Helen's voice was panicked now, all pretense of dignity abandoned. Please. I'm sorry. I didn't mean. I'll sit down. I'll be quiet. Please don't do this. You've had multiple opportunities to make better choices, James said. You've declined every single one. Now you face the consequences. Maria and another flight attendant, David, moved to flank Helen, ready to restrain her if necessary. Other passengers had pulled out their phones, some recording, others texting updates. This was going to be all over social media before they even touched down in Denver. The businessman in 3C started a slow clap. Others joined in, the applause building, passengers standing, supporting the captain's decision even though it meant delays for all of them. Because sometimes inconvenience is worth it to prove a point, to draw a line in the sand and say this behavior will not be tolerated. Helen sank into her seat, her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Whether from anger or shame or fear, it was hard to tell. Probably all three. James knelt once more beside his daughters. Amara and Zuri had been silent through the entire confrontation, watching their father command the situation with a mixture of awe and relief. You okay? He asked softly, his large hand covering both of theirs. Yes, Daddy, Amara whispered. Thank you. You don't thank me for protecting you. That's my job. That's what fathers do. He squeezed their hands gently. I need to go fly this plane now. We're going to land in Denver, security will remove this woman, and then we'll continue to LA to see your mama. Okay? Okay, they said in unison. I love you both. So much. We love you too, Daddy. He stood, his eyes sweeping the cabin one more time. I want to thank those of you who spoke up just now. That's what it takes, people willing to stand up when they see something wrong happening. Not just recording it, but actually intervening. That's how we change things. He looked at Helen, slumped in her seat, destroyed by her own hatred. And to you, ma'am, I hope you use your time in Denver to reflect on how you treat people. How you see people. Because your assumptions about who my daughters are, about what they deserve, about where they belong, those assumptions revealed everything about who you are. Nothing about who they are. The cockpit door closed behind him. The plane continued its descent toward Denver. And in seat 1C, Helen Chamberlain understood that her platinum status, her expensive clothes, her entitled demands meant absolutely nothing in the face of a father's love and a captain's authority. 30 minutes later, the plane touched down in Denver. Emergency vehicles weren't needed. This wasn't a medical emergency or mechanical failure. But airport security was there, 2 officers boarding the plane before anyone else moved. Maria led them directly to Helen. This is the passenger, Captain Mitchell reported. Helen tried one more time, her voice desperate. This is a misunderstanding. I'm being discriminated against because... Ma'am, we need you to gather your belongings and come with us, one officer said firmly. The captain has filed a formal complaint for passenger interference and harassment of minors. You'll need to speak with airport authorities. Helen stood on shaking legs, grabbed her designer purse, her Hermes scarf trailing behind her like a flag of defeat. She had to walk past Amara and Zuri to exit the plane. For just a second, she paused, opened her mouth like she might say something. Keep moving, ma'am, the officer said. She kept moving. Past the twins, she tried to demean. Past the passengers who'd witnessed her ugliness. Past Maria, who'd documented every word. Down the jetway and into custody, her perfect LA meeting now impossible, her platinum status now meaningless, her prejudice now carrying a cost she'd never imagined. The older black woman across the aisle reached over and squeezed Zuri's hand one more time. That's what accountability looks like, baby. Remember this day. I will, Zuri promised. The plane sat at the gate for 45 minutes while statements were taken and paperwork was filed. Some passengers deplaned to stretch, others stayed in their seats, processing what they'd witnessed. The teenager who'd been recording posted his video with the caption, "Captain diverts entire flight to protect his daughters from racist passenger. This is what justice looks like." It went viral before they even took off again. When Flight 1847 finally arrived in Los Angeles, 3 hours late, Sierra Mitchell was waiting at the gate. She swept her daughters into her arms, holding them so tight they could barely breathe, tears streaming down her face because James had called her, had told her everything, and she'd spent those 3 hours imagining her babies being humiliated and scared. "My brave girls," she whispered into their hair. "My strong, beautiful, brave girls." And behind them, Captain James Mitchell stood in his uniform, watching his family reunite, knowing he'd pay a price for diverting that flight. There would be investigations, reports, and meetings with executives. Some would say he overreacted. Some would say he should have handled it more quietly. But when he saw his daughters smiling again, saw Zuri's tears finally dry, saw Amara's shoulders relax for the first time in hours, he knew he'd made exactly the right choice. Because some things are worth fighting for. Some things are worth the inconvenience, the cost, the consequences. His daughter's dignity was worth all of that and more. 3 days after the incident, Helen Chamberlain received a letter at her home in Santa Monica. The return address was Delta Airlines corporate headquarters. Her hands shook as she opened it, though she already knew what it would say. "Dear Miss Chamberlain, based on your conduct aboard Flight 1847 on March 15th, and in accordance with our passenger code of conduct, you are hereby permanently banned from flying on Delta Airlines and all SkyTeam Alliance carriers. Your discriminatory harassment of minor passengers, your refusal to comply with crew instructions, and your attempted physical intimidation of a child constitute violations that we cannot and will not tolerate. Permanently banned. Not from one airline, but from an entire alliance. 23 carriers across the globe. Her business travel, her vacation plans, her carefully accumulated miles, all gone. But the letter was just the beginning. The video from the flight had exploded across social media. Over 15 million views. News outlets picked it up. Captain diverts flight to protect daughters from racist passenger became a national story. Helen's face was everywhere, blurred in some versions but clearly visible in others. Her name was trending. Her employer, a consulting firm in LA, had received thousands of calls and emails demanding her termination. She was fired 4 days after the flight. "We do not tolerate discriminatory behavior," her former boss told reporters. "Ms. Chamberlain's actions do not reflect our company values." Her social media accounts, once filled with vacation photos and humble brags about first-class upgrades, were deactivated after the harassment became unbearable. Friends stopped returning her calls. Her exclusive country club membership was under review. Invitations to charity galas suddenly dried up. Helen Chamberlain had thought she was simply exercising her right to comfort, her prerogative as a paying customer. She'd thought those girls didn't belong in first class based on nothing but the color of their skin. Now she was learning that her assumptions, her prejudice, her casual cruelty carried consequences she'd never imagined. Meanwhile, Captain James Mitchell faced his own reckoning, but of a different kind. Delta's executive team called him into a meeting at corporate headquarters in Atlanta. He'd prepared for discipline, possibly suspension, maybe even termination. Diverting a flight costs the airline money, fuel, gate fees, passenger compensation, and crew overtime. But when he walked into that conference room, the executives stood up. The CEO extended his hand. "Captain Mitchell, on behalf of Delta Airlines, I want to thank you for your actions on Flight 1847. You protected passengers under your command, you handled a volatile situation with professionalism, and you demonstrated the kind of leadership we want representing our brand." James was speechless. "We're not disciplining you," the CEO continued. "We're commending you. And we're implementing new mandatory training for all crew members on handling discrimination incidents based directly on this case. We're calling it the Mitchell Protocol. Have you ever wondered if standing up for what's right is worth the potential cost? If using your power to protect others might backfire, might hurt you more than help them? Captain Mitchell had wondered that too, for just a moment, before deciding his daughter's dignity mattered more than any career consequence. The story became more than viral video content. It sparked conversations in corporate boardrooms, in homes, in schools. Major airlines reviewed their policies. Flight attendant unions demanded better training on recognizing and addressing discrimination. Passengers started speaking up more, recording more, and refusing to stay silent when they witnessed injustice. And at the center of it all were two 12-year-old girls who'd simply wanted to fly to see their mother, who'd done nothing wrong except exist in seats they had every right to occupy. Amara and Zuri became reluctant symbols, their names attached to a movement they never asked to lead. But their father sat them down one evening, the three of them together in his Atlanta home, and talked about what it meant. "People are watching now," he said. "Watching to see if we stay quiet or speak up. Watching to see if this moment means something or fades away. What do you want to do?" The twins looked at each other, that twin communication that needed no words. Then Amara spoke for both of them. "We want to tell our story, so it doesn't happen to other kids." And so they did. 6 months after Flight 1847, Amara and Zuri Mitchell sat on a stage at the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee. The auditorium was packed with students, educators, activists, and ordinary people who'd been moved by their story. Their father sat in the front row, his uniform replaced today with a simple suit, watching his daughters with pride that made his chest tight. The moderator, a journalist named Patricia Williams, asked the question everyone wanted to know. "When that woman told you that you belonged in the back of the plane, what went through your minds?" Zuri looked at her sister, then spoke into the microphone, her voice steady but soft. "I thought maybe she was right. For a second, I thought maybe we did make a mistake. Maybe we weren't supposed to be there. Because she was so sure, you know? So confident that we didn't belong." The audience was silent, hanging on every word. "That's the thing about racism," Amara added, her voice stronger, older somehow than her 12 years. "It doesn't just hurt you on the outside. It makes you doubt yourself on the inside. It makes you question if maybe you really are less than, if maybe you really don't deserve the same things other people get without even thinking about it." Patricia leaned forward. "What changed? What made you realize she was wrong?" "Our dad," both girls said simultaneously, then laughed at the twin moment. Zuri continued, "When he came out of that cockpit and knelt beside us, he didn't look at us like we'd done something wrong. He looked at us like we were exactly where we belonged. Like we were worthy of protection, of respect, of taking up space." James wiped his eyes in the front row, not caring who saw. "But also," Amara said thoughtfully, "the people who spoke up after. The woman who held our hands. The man who told that lady to sit down and be quiet. The passengers who recorded what happened. They showed us that not everyone is like her. That there are people who will stand with you if you give them the chance." After the panel, a young black boy, maybe 8 years old, approached them shyly. His mother stood behind him, encouraging. "Go ahead, baby. Ask them." "I get scared sometimes," the boy said, looking at his shoes. "I'm scared to go places where there aren't a lot of people who look like me. Is that okay? Does that make me a coward?" Zuri knelt to his level, just like their father had done for them. "It doesn't make you a coward. It makes you human. Being scared is okay. But you know what? You still get to go to those places. You still get to take up space. You just hold your head high and remember that you belong there as much as anyone." "And if someone tries to make you feel like you don't belong?" the boy asked. "Then you tell someone," Amara said, joining her sister. "A parent, a teacher, anyone who will listen. And if they don't help, you tell someone else. You keep telling until someone hears you. That's not being dramatic or making trouble. That's standing up for yourself." The boy's mother was crying now, mouthing, "Thank you," over and over. Later that evening, back in their hotel room, the twins sat with their father, exhausted but energized by the day. James ordered room service, burgers and fries and milkshakes, their favorite, and they ate together in comfortable silence for a while. "Dad," Amara finally said, "do you think what happened to us will actually change anything? Or will people just forget and go back to the way things were?" James set down his burger, considered the question seriously because his daughters deserved serious answers. "I think some people will forget. Some people will go back to looking away when they see discrimination happen. But some people won't. Some people will remember this moment and decide to be braver next time, to speak up sooner, to refuse to be silent witnesses." "Is that enough?" Zuri asked. "Some people? It's a start, baby girl. Change doesn't happen all at once. It happens person by person, moment by moment, choice by choice. Every time someone decides to speak up instead of staying silent, that's change. Every time someone examines their own biases instead of defending them, that's change. Every time a kid like you stands tall in a space where someone says you don't belong, that's change." He pulled both girls close. "Your story, our story, it's bigger than that flight now. It's become part of a larger conversation about who gets to take up space in this world, who gets believed, and who gets protected. That's not nothing. That's everything." Amara leaned her head on his shoulder. "Daddy? What happened to that woman? Helen?" "She lost her job. Got banned from flying on most major airlines. Became, for a while, the face of exactly what not to do." James paused. "I don't take pleasure in that. I don't celebrate someone else's downfall. But I do believe in accountability. Actions have consequences. She chose to humiliate children based on their skin color. She chose to escalate when given multiple chances to de-escalate. Those were her choices. Do you think she's sorry?" Zuri asked. "Like, really sorry, not just sorry she got caught?" "I don't know, sweetheart. I hope so. I hope she's doing the work to understand why she thought and acted the way she did. I hope she's learning. But whether she changes or not, the important thing is that the world saw what happened. Saw that discrimination has consequences. Saw that silence in the face of injustice makes you complicit. Saw that sometimes the right thing to do is inconvenient, but it's still right." They sat together, father and daughters, watching the Memphis skyline through the hotel window. Somewhere out there, other families were having similar conversations. Other children were learning to stand tall. Other adults were examining their own biases, their own moments of silence when they should have spoken. The incident on Flight 1847 had become a watershed moment, a line in the sand, a story that would be told and retold in classrooms and living rooms for years to come. But for James, Amara and Zuri Mitchell, it was also deeply personal. It was the day they'd been forced to confront racism directly, publicly, painfully. It was the day a father had to choose between his career and his children's dignity. It was the day two 12-year-old girls learned that sometimes the world will try to make you small, but you don't have to accept that. "I'm proud of you both," James said quietly. "Not just for handling that day, but for choosing to tell your story after. For being willing to relive something painful so others might learn from it. That takes courage." "We learned it from you," Amara said. "Yeah," Zuri agreed. "You taught us that belonging isn't something someone else gets to decide for you. You just belong. Period." James smiled, his heart full despite the heaviness of the conversation. "That's right. You belong everywhere you choose to be. First class, front of the bus, best schools, top jobs, anywhere your dreams take you. And anyone who says different is revealing their own limitations, not yours." Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars brought down to earth. And inside that hotel room, a family that had been tested by hatred chose, again and again, to respond with dignity, with courage, with an unwavering belief that their humanity was non-negotiable. The question remained, would this moment fade, or would it mark a turning point? Would Helen Chamberlain be the last person to demand that black children move to the back, or would there be others? Would passengers continue to speak up, or would silence once again become the default? Only time would tell. But tonight, at least, change felt possible. 1 year after the incident, Amara and Zuri Mitchell boarded another flight. Same airline. Same route. Atlanta to Los Angeles to visit their mother. This time, Their father wasn't flying the plane. He was sitting right beside them in first class, taking a rare day off to travel with his daughters. As they settled into their seats, an older white woman in the row across smiled warmly at them. "First time flying?" she asked kindly. "No, ma'am," Amara replied with a slight smile. "We've flown before." The woman nodded, went back to her book, and that was it. No drama. No demands. No discrimination. Just ordinary courtesy extended to fellow passengers who happened to be young and black. "See," James whispered to his daughters. "This is how it should be. This is normal." "Yeah," Zuri whispered back. "But we had to fight for normal, didn't we?" James squeezed her hand. "Sometimes you do. But that's what makes you strong. That's what makes you someone who changes the world instead of just living in it." The flight was uneventful, peaceful, exactly what air travel should be. And when they landed in Los Angeles, when Sierra met them at the gate with tears and hugs and laughter, the Mitchell family was whole again, stronger for what they'd been through, determined to keep telling their story until no other family had to live theirs. Now here's what we want to know from you. Do you think racial discrimination and prejudice can truly end? Not just improve gradually over generations, but actually end in our lifetime? What do you think needs to happen to curb it, to root it out completely from our schools, our workplaces, our airplanes, our everyday interactions? Do you think serving justice to people like Helen Chamberlain is enough to end racism, or does it take something deeper, something that changes hearts and minds, not just policies and consequences? Tell us your honest opinion in the comments below. Share your own experiences of discrimination, of standing up, of staying silent and wishing you hadn't, of witnessing injustice and having to choose what kind of person you wanted to be in that moment. What would you have done in Captain James Mitchell's shoes? Would you have diverted that plane, risking your career and inconveniencing hundreds of passengers? Or would you have handled it quietly, privately, after landing? Would you have used your authority the way he did, or would fear of consequences have held you back? Let us know in the comments. And what about if you'd been a passenger on that flight? Would you have been the person who spoke up immediately, who recorded the incident, who stood with those girls? Or would you have been someone who looked away, who stayed silent, who told themselves it wasn't their business? Be honest with yourself. Honesty is the first step toward being better. If you want racism to become a thing of the past in our country and world at large, if you want to be like Amara, Zuri, and Captain James Mitchell, using whatever platform you have to educate others, raise awareness, and stand up for what's right even when it's uncomfortable, then share this video right now. Subscribe to the Hyper Racism channel. Hit that like button. Because together, one story at a time, one stand at a time, one person refusing to accept discrimination as normal at a time, we can build a world where every child knows they belong. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring enough to make it to the end of this story. Thank you for being part of the conversation that creates real, lasting change. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, with someone who's ever felt like they didn't belong, with someone who has the power to speak up but hasn't found their voice yet, with someone who needs to understand that silence isn't neutrality, it's choosing the side of the oppressor. The Mitchell family is thriving now. The girls are in 8th grade, confident and strong, planning for futures where they'll take up all the space they deserve. Captain Mitchell still flies, still does his unannounced checks, still makes sure every crew member understands that dignity isn't negotiable. And Helen Chamberlain? She's a reminder that your prejudice will eventually cost you everything when the world is watching. But more importantly, this story is a reminder that you have power. Power to speak up. Power to record. Power to refuse to be a silent witness. Power to teach your children that everyone deserves respect. Power to examine your own biases and do better. The question is, will you use it? The choice, as always, is yours.